pivot the Broncos made, and when I say the Broncos made the pivot, I mean Shawn Payton made the pivot, because Shawn Payton is the Broncos.
Correct.
And the Broncos are Shawn Payton. There is no separation between how the Broncos present themselves, how they represent themselves in the community. There is no separation between the Broncos and Shawn Payton. He is them, and they are he.
Yes.
I believe
yes.
That's correct.
Yes. Or as even Louis XIV once said, "L'état c'est moi." I am the state.
That's who Shawn Payton is. And the pivot made by Shawn Payton from pre-Russell Wilson, doesn't matter how many games we win, playoffs are the only thing that matters. Right?
Right.
I'll be disappointed, distressed,
pissed was his word,
maniacally torqued off if we don't make the playoffs. That was a statement made a few months back. Right? And now, post-Russell Wilson, and make no mistake, we are talking about the end of the Russell Wilson era in Denver. After less than 2 years, Russell Wilson lasted a few weeks longer than Josh McDaniels lasted back in 2009, 2010. He beat him by a few weeks. Russell Wilson, in December of his second year, was, for all practical purposes, fired by the Denver Broncos. Officially demoted, unofficially fired.
Right.
Josh McDaniels was fired in early December of 2010 as head coach of the Denver Broncos. But McDaniels, speaking not of anything you might attribute to him personally, professional point of view, was the provocateur, the architect of his own demise. In this particular case, Russell Wilson is much more victim than villain. And whatever you think of Russell Wilson, you have to salute his professionalism, because he spent almost 2 months knowing that he would not, at some point, be the starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos, and survived as long as he did, largely because the Broncos went on a 5-game winning streak, and not necessarily in a secondary way, the Broncos were threatened by the NFLPA with a very large lawsuit.
And that may not be done.
And that may still come to pass.
It may.
If the National Football League had any sense of self-awareness, and if the NFL weren't so caught up in its own hype and its own TV ratings, the Broncos would not have 6 draft picks come this April. The Broncos would have 5 draft picks this April. They would not have a first-round draft choice this April. That's what the NFLPA would want.
Mm-hmm.
And if the NFLPA doesn't get something along those lines, I think the NFL will bring legal action against the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos are a despicable organization as currently constructed. Yes. And the NFLPA, I hope, will follow through and take action.
This is, again, Sean Payton finding a way. Remember, Sean Payton began the year talking to USA Today about how he felt that, and Seth Wickersham, who we had on this program to talk about it, about how he thought that Roger Goodell was still after him. The leagues are still after him. If you're Roger Goodell, you've got to be rolling your eyes over the last 2 weeks and going, this guy just keeps getting us in trouble.
More than 10 years after Bountygate. And what I was going to say about the pivot.
Gets us right back in trouble again.
The pivot. And this is merely disingenuous. It isn't even necessarily objectionable. I mean, coaches do this. But on top of all the lies, he pivots from saying it's only about playoffs to now, hey, it's a hell of a year if we win 9 games.
Right.
Have a winning record. That's a hell of a year. And now he's got the players parroting that line, too. Yeah, too bad we're out of the playoffs, but we can still be a winning team. You know what? They were a winning team in 2016. You know who got fired?
Guy who won the Super Bowl.
The guy who won the Super Bowl for him the year before.
Exactly.
The best coach on the staff, who happened to be defensive coordinator Wade Phillips. No disrespect intended to head coach Gary Kubiak.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Kubiak, I think, would acknowledge that Wade Phillips was the star coach on that staff in 2015 when the Broncos won the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And Rick Perea, who will be joining us tomorrow as part of our weekly Wellness Wednesday program, checkup from the neck up, will, I'm sure, second that notion that Wade Phillips was the MVC of that 2015 Broncos season, most valuable coach. No one would seriously dispute that. And he was fired at the end of 2016. So there were consequences to missing the playoffs. That's
a contract
back when
negotiation as well.
The Broncos, yes.
Wade Phillips wanted a raise of roughly $500,000.
Yes.
The Broncos
and the Broncos said, no, we'll go and get, Vance Joseph is our head coach, so we'll just promote one of our assistants, Joe Woods, and make him the defensive coordinator, although Vance Joseph did, I think, most of the work, if not the play calling, most of the time.
Yeah, that year.
I think that, especially that first year, it was Joe Woods on whom responsibility fell. But in any case, back in 2016, the Broncos still had some semblance of decency, although they made a very poor decision on Wade Phillips. They had some semblance of decency. Any sense of decency that the Broncos once had 7 years ago, over the last 7 football seasons and maybe part of an 8th, any sense of decency is now gone. The Broncos have gone from being, even during the Pat Bowlen years, a relatively poor NFL team because Pat Bowlen was not among the richest 10 or even the richest 20, perhaps not even one of the richest 30 owners in the National Football League during most of his time as owner, if not all of his time as owner of the Denver Broncos. But the Broncos stood for values that we could generally embrace. We did not always agree with decisions the Broncos made, but there was nothing, not anything, over the approximately 30 years that Pat Bowlen was in day-to-day charge of the Denver Broncos without being Jerry Jones and assuming general manager duties. There was nothing to approximate what we are now seeing from this organization. And yes, the owners are new, but that's no excuse for the bullying tactics that they utilized. And I have no doubt that George Payton was a part of that too. And George Payton's not going to have a job one way or the other, but maybe George Payton thought 2 months ago, this is the way I saved my job.
Which you and I said back in April.
Put the hammer on Russell Wilson and start threatening him.
Right.
Saying, we're going to bench you unless you, and I'll use the euphemism here, alter your injury guarantee for 2025.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do that, we will bench you. Happened during a bye week. The last time I remember any behavior that was even comparable to this was in 2010, actually 2009, when after a 6-0 start during a bye week, Josh McDaniels decided to cut his punter, who became, over the ensuing decade, one of the best punters in the National Football League, if not the best punter in the National Football League during that stretch. But this is worse. This is putting the muscle on someone who the Broncos know is not going to be universally defended I have a feeling Broncos fans in the main are sophisticated enough to understand what happened here and who the bully was and who was the victim and also the professional who played through this period in which the Broncos were threatening to have him benched, if not released, if he didn't submit to their threats and waive his insurance guarantee. And Russell Wilson's been a durable player, too, throughout his career. Say what you will otherwise about him. He's been durable, and in this case, thoroughly professional, and even got a salute from a longtime rival this week.
Yeah. And it's,
which we will hear about a little bit later on in the program.
The punter, of course, you're mentioning Brett Kern, who then went on to 3 Pro Bowls.
Yeah, and about whom Bill Belichick said prior to a New England-Tennessee playoff game that Tennessee won, by the way, in 2019, in Tom Brady's last game as quarterback of the New England Patriots, Bill Belichick told the announcing crew in the production meeting that Brett Kern was the best football player in the Tennessee Titans, the most valuable, and acknowledging Belichick's fondness for special teams
Correct.
and for punters, place kickers, and guys who specialize in that part of the game, which Bill Belichick knows inside and out. He's the greatest special teams coach in the history of the league. This year's special teams performance by the Patriots notwithstanding, although they were pretty good on special teams against the Broncos on Christmas Eve, weren't they? Listen, but that's a personnel mistake, okay? It's a bad one. It's a little bit petty. This is more than petty on the Broncos' part. This is totally unprofessional. I love it when people say, when it's players trying to renegotiate, hey, a contract's a contract.
Yes, right.
But when it's an owner or the front office, or better yet, a combination of the two, along with a head coach whose fingerprints are all over this, though he denies knowing, that's just an outright lie. When the organization puts the muscle on a player to, if not waive, then at least postpone payment on an injury guarantee, then I guess a contract's not a contract anymore.
I like that you brought that up because that's one of the things that always bothered me because obviously it's been interesting for the last week to talk with people. And it seems like, and I get it for fans, and I guess I pose this question to you for fans. I do. I'm intrigued. At what point, and I'm just throwing it out there in the most generic of terms, at what point do the ethics of winning matter to you, or which do they not? And I just ask you to take a moment to think about it, because what Sandy pointed out, I think, is really important. And at the same time, you're right. A contract is a contract. It goes one way. But the main argument is Russell Wilson got paid this and he wasn't good enough, so I don't care what happens to him. Really? Is that your thought process? Now, if it's about money for the Denver Broncos, let's say the Denver Broncos did this to, I don't know, multiple time, their nominee for Man of the Year, Justin Simmons?
Yep.
Would you be equally cool with it? Because Broncos just trying to save money. They're just trying to make sure they manage their cap so they can be better and they can get wins. Are you equally cool with it? Russell Wilson is an NFL Man of the Year winner. That's what that image of Walter Payton is on his jersey for, that he gets to wear for the rest of his career. The only award in which the NFL allows that, by the way. So you want to go about how Russell Wilson's like the bad guy here? Give me a break. Jared Stidham talked about how the whole week Wilson basically was there to give him everything he wanted, coach him up. Stidham raved about Wilson's situation, through the situation, to be a good teammate and to help him. Russell Wilson, and we told you this, Russell Wilson will start for another team this year. I'm looking at you, Pittsburgh Steelers, because he is going to be able to walk into free agency and say, one, I was better than I was last year. Despite the fact my coach didn't want me to succeed, everyone watched the season and watched the vanilla, bland, completely uninventive play calling all year long. I still finished, and at the moment, if he holds up among qualifying quarterbacks, he'll finish 6th in passer rating between Jared Goff and C.J. Stroud, both of whom may be in the playoffs. And I get it. We both like QBR as a metric, but passer rating still matters.
Sure it does.
He's going to finish 6th. And what you also know when you add Russell Wilson is the guy's not going to get your team in trouble. He's not going to rock the boat, even when things are unfair to him. Maybe he is, as you've constantly put it. Now, leave it to you, Mr. Positive, obviously, when it comes.
Sultan of Sunshine.
And that is who Russell Wilson is. But there are teams going, you know what? I'd rather deal with that. I know this guy's not going to make any waves. He's going to be a good teammate. And look, 11 of the 16 AFC teams this weekend, 11 started backup quarterbacks. 11. That's it. Wilson has been durable despite 45 sacks, and his whole career he's basically been durable. Russell Wilson's not going to have a problem finding a job next year. I guarantee you he's not. And he won't be competing for someone's backup job either. Don't think that's going to happen. There are coaches that understand I can work with this guy. Sean Payton never wanted to.
He will have a chance to compete for a starting job.
And I ask Broncos fans to go back and look. And go back and look through the season, knowing now what you know, and ask me if Sean Payton called the best possible offense he could call to go win football games. Because if it's all about wins to you, maybe check and see if your coach was up on it. Because I'm not convinced he was.